The hammering stopped just before sundown. Eli Booker squinted up at the crooked roofline, sweat rolling off the edge of his stubbled jaw. The sky behind it had turned to flame, that raw orange fire you only saw before a storm on the high plains. He set the hammer down, the old wood groaning beneath him, and let out a long breath. It had been quiet all day, except for the wind. Too quiet. Then, from inside the house, something cracked, like a plate hitting the floor. He froze. The woman hadn't spoken a word since he arrived that morning. Not even when he tipped his hat or asked about the leak. Just opened the door, nodded, and let him work. But that sound, that wasn't an accident. That was anger. Or grief. Eli swung down off the ladder, his boots landing soft in the dirt. The air had thickened. Storm coming. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped toward the open doorway, the screen creaking gently in the breeze. And then he saw her, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by shattered porcelain, shoulders trembling, fists clenched so hard her knuckles looked bone-white. He didn't say a word, just stood there. She didn't look up. But let's go back to where it all started. The town of Finch Hollow didn't look like much, just a row of crooked buildings sagging under the weight of time and wind, a saloon that only served beer on Sundays, a church that leaned west like it was tired of praying, and a dusty general store where the bell over the door had been rusted into silence. Eli rolled in just after sunrise with nothing but a saddlebag, a broken past, and a reputation he couldn't shake. Word was, he'd once ridden with a bounty crew that turned on each other down near Tombstone. No one ever asked which side he landed on. They just watched him with quiet eyes, like they were waiting for the story to unfold all over again. He wasn't looking for trouble, wasn't looking for redemption either. Just work, nails and boards, something to keep his hands busy and his mind quiet. That's when old Walt Renshaw pointed toward the edge of town and said, "She's the only one needs fixing done. Widow. Name's Clara Duval. Roof's been leaking near 3 seasons now. But she don't let folks in much. You want that job, you go ask her yourself." So Eli did. The house sat alone at the end of a dirt lane, tucked behind a wind-bent fence and 2 dying cottonwoods. It wasn't big, just wide enough to catch the wind, and low enough to miss the morning sun. The kind of house that looked like it was waiting for someone to come back who never did. She answered the door after 2 knocks. Brown hair tied back with a strip of linen. Eyes the color of dried lavender, soft, but hard around the edges. No smile. Just a nod toward the ladder and a purse of the lips that said, "You know what to do." Eli worked in silence. Hauled his own nails. Didn't ask questions. Something about her made that easy. She didn't offer water and he didn't expect it. She didn't say thank you when he nailed down the last shingle before dusk. And he figured maybe she didn't need to. But that first night, as he walked away down the road, he looked back once. She was still standing in the doorway watching the sky. Not him. The sky. The next morning he found a folded cloth on the porch. Biscuits still warm. No note. He nodded once to no one in particular and went back to work. By the 3rd day, he'd stopped thinking of her as the widow. She wasn't brittle like folks whispered. She was solid, quiet like rock. But something was off. A tension in the air around her, like the house was holding its breath. That afternoon, while hammering the last board over the eastern eave, Eli glanced down and saw a small wooden box half buried under the crawlspace. The wind had shifted the dirt just enough to show it. Looked old. Burnt edges. He didn't touch it, but it stuck with him. Later, when he came down for water, he asked her, "You bury something under there?" Clara paused, dried her hands on her skirt. "My husband," she said softly, "was a carpenter too. That's where he kept his tool chest. And now," she looked at him then, long and hard, "now it's where I keep what's left of him." Eli nodded once, said nothing more. But that night he didn't sleep easy. The storm rolled in faster than it should have. By sundown, clouds had bruised the horizon and the wind was talking low and sharp through the cracks in the shutters. Eli packed up his tools and stepped inside, more by instinct than invitation. She didn't stop him. The room was dim, oil lamp flickering in the corner. A painting hung askew above the mantel. A young man in uniform. Blue coat, brass buttons. Union Army. One side of his mouth crooked, like he smiled more than he should have. "That him?" Eli asked gently. Clara didn't look up. She just stared at the floor, fingers twisting in her lap. "You ever fix something?" she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "That just keeps breaking? No matter how many nails you drive into it, no matter how tight you pull it together." Eli didn't answer, just sat on the edge of the old rocking chair. She looked at him then, eyes red-rimmed. 3 years. 3 years since the telegram came. And still, every time it rains, this house leaks in a new place. Like it's reminding me. Outside, thunder growled low across the plains. Then the plate slipped from her hand, shattered, sharp echo in the stillness. She didn't cry, just sat there, breathing heavy, jaw clenched. Eli stood in the doorway, hat in hand. And for the first time, she said his name. Eli. It wasn't a question, wasn't even a greeting. It was a plea. And something in it cracked open a part of him he thought he'd buried years ago. Back when the shooting started and the dying didn't stop. Something was broken here. But maybe it wasn't just the roof. He didn't come back the next day. Eli walked halfway to the house, hammer in hand, then stopped at the edge of the cottonwoods and stared at the fence swaying in the breeze. The sky was pale and flat, the storm long gone, but something in the air still felt charged. He turned back toward town, walked slowly. By the time he got to Renshaw's store, his boots were coated in red dust, and the tension in his chest was tighter than it had been in years. He didn't speak, just stood by the barrels of flour and stared at nothing in particular. Renshaw noticed. Old man had a habit of watching without blinking. "You finished that job?" Eli didn't look at him. "More or less." "She pay you?" "She paid me," Eli said. "In biscuits." Renshaw chuckled. "Well, that's more than most folks get outta Clara Duval." Then he leaned in. "Word is, you been talking with her some." Eli frowned. "Not much." "Still," Renshaw muttered, scratching at his beard. "Folks don't talk to her much anymore. Not since her husband turned up dead with Apache arrows in his back and a war medal still pinned to his coat." Eli stiffened. "War'll do things to a man," Renshaw added. "But it's worse on the ones left behind. Some think she ain't right. Others say she's just angry." He paused. "But there's one thing everybody agrees on." Eli waited. "She shouldn't have brought that child in." 2 years back, rumor had it Clara had found a child, maybe 7 or 8, half-starved, bleeding, barely breathing near the riverbed south of her land. No one saw it happen. No one knew the whole story. But word spread fast. An Apache boy, or so they said, and she brought him into her home. No sheriff, no questions, no announcements, just took him in. For a while there were whispers, then there were glares, then folks stopped walking past her place altogether. "You seen him?" Eli asked. Renshaw shook his head. "Not in a while. Some say he left. Others think she keeps him hidden when strangers come close." Eli didn't say another word, just picked up a bag of nails and left 2 coins on the counter. That evening he went back. Didn't bring tools. Didn't bring questions. Just walked through the fading sunlight, let the dirt crunch under his boots, and watched the house grow out of the horizon like a memory that hadn't settled right. She was waiting on the porch. "I softer this time. Hair loose." "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said. "I wasn't either." She stood, looked down the road, then back at him. "You heard the stories, then?" "I did. And," Eli tilted his head slightly, "I've heard worse stories. Lived through a few." She didn't smile, but she didn't turn away either. "I've got one more patch needs fixing," she said after a moment. "By the stove. I can look at it in the morning." She nodded, then hesitated. "There's something I want to show you." She led him through the house, past the kitchen, past the broken plate she still hadn't swept, to a back room where the light barely reached. The curtains were drawn, but one side fluttered where the wind had found a way in. And there, in the corner, half covered by a wool blanket, sat a boy. Maybe 9, maybe 10 now. Dark hair, thin arms, eyes too big for his face. He stared at Eli unmoving. He doesn't speak much, Clara said softly. Not in English, but he listens, learns fast, sometimes hums to himself. Little songs I don't recognize. Eli stepped forward slowly, crouched to the boy's level. Evening, he said gently. The boy didn't respond, just kept his eyes locked on Eli's. After a moment, Eli pulled something from his pocket. A nail, shiny and new. He held it out. Want to help fix something tomorrow? The boy looked at the nail, then at Clara, then, without a word, reached out and took it. A simple gesture. But in that silence, something shifted. The next morning, the boy was waiting by the porch when Eli arrived. Clara handed them both slices of bread. No words exchanged. They worked together most of the morning. Eli hammering, the boy holding nails, passing wood, pointing to the smallest cracks in the wall that even Eli missed. He never spoke, but he smiled once, just once, when Eli accidentally hit his thumb and muttered something under his breath. And when the sun reached its peak, the boy tugged Eli's sleeve and pointed out toward the fields. Smoke. 3 columns rising on the edge of the horizon. Faint, but steady. Eli's chest tightened. That signal? He asked quietly. The boy nodded once. Clara stepped out behind them, saw it too. Scouts, she said. They're looking. Eli turned. For him. She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. By sundown, word had reached town. Riders had seen the smoke. One man swore he saw feathers. Others spoke of horses painted in war colors. Sheriff Thompson called a meeting in the church. Eli showed up late, took a seat near the back, listened. They're testing us, Thompson said. Looking for weakness. Looking to reclaim what ain't theirs. Murmurs of agreement. Nods. Someone mentioned Clara by name. Loud enough to be a warning. Could be they're here for that boy, the sheriff continued. Could be they're not. But if they come, we answer in kind. You hear me? Eli stood before he realized he was doing it. She's no threat, he said. Calm. Measured. 20 heads turned. 20 pairs of eyes narrowed. She gave that boy a roof. Food. She's not hiding an enemy. Sheriff folded his arms. Didn't peg you for a sympathizer, Booker. Eli met his eyes. I'm not. But I know the look of someone who's been hunted. And that boy? He ain't hunting anyone. A pause. Heavy and long. You sticking your neck out for her? Eli didn't blink. I reckon I am. Outside, the wind picked up. And somewhere far off, a distant drumbeat echoed through the land. Not thunder. Not hooves. A signal. Something was coming. The knock came at midnight. Not the kind that asks for permission, the kind that warns you it's already too late. 3 slow pounds on the door, deliberate and deep, like a judge backslashes gavel before sentencing. Eli reached for the rifle before he even opened his eyes. The room was dark, moonlight slanting through the cracks in the boards. From the front room, he could hear Clara's bare feet hitting the floorboards. Soft, steady, no panic. Just the sound of someone who knew fear well enough to walk beside it. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stepped into his boots. The rifle's cold iron bit into his palm. Outside, wind rustled through the cottonwoods like a whisper trying to be a scream. Another knock. Eli moved into the front room, rifle low but ready. Clara stood with the boy behind her. His small fingers gripped the back of her dress. Knuckles white, face unreadable. I locked the back door, she said, almost as an afterthought. The knock came again, softer now. Not forceful. Not demanding. Just steady. Eli stepped forward, put a hand on the knob, then paused. You sure? Clara nodded once. They already know he's here. He opened the door. And there they were. 3 of them. Tall. Silent. Horses behind them. Painted in ash and ochre. One wore a red cloth across his forehead. Feathers braided into long black hair. Another had a necklace of bone and turquoise. None of them looked angry. None of them looked afraid. They just stood. The one in front, older, stepped forward. He spoke in a tongue Eli didn't know. Smooth, melodic, like wind over river stones. The boy stepped out from behind Clara. Didn't speak either. Just looked up at the man, wide-eyed, unblinking. Then, he took a step forward. The man crouched, slowly, and said something else. The boy stared at him, then looked back at Clara. Clara's breath caught, just for a moment. Then the boy stepped forward again, and fell into the man's arms. There was no shouting, no sobbing, just stillness. Eli lowered the rifle. The man rose, the boy at his side now. Not held, not dragged, just beside him, as if no time had passed, as if the whole world hadn't shifted. Clara stepped onto the porch, stopped just at the edge. "He remembers you," she said. Her voice shook, but not from fear. "He's been dreaming of faces he couldn't name. I think you're one of them." The man said nothing, just nodded. Another man, younger, eyes like burning coal, finally stepped forward. He looked at Clara with something between respect and sorrow, then turned to Eli. "White men killed his father," he said in slow, careful English. "Soldiers, same ones that sent your brother home in a box." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. The man continued. "But she," he nodded toward Clara, "did not kill. She fed him. He lived." Silence settled again. Clara stepped down from the porch. "Will you take him back now?" The older man glanced down at the boy, then back to Clara. Then softly he asked a question. The younger one translated. He asks, "Do you want him back?" Clara froze. A long moment passed. Then she knelt, cupped the boy's face in her hands, and whispered something only he could hear. His eyes welled, but he didn't cry. He nodded solemnly. She stood. "He belongs to the land," she said. "Not to me. I just made sure he didn't leave it too soon." The boy turned and hugged her, arms tight around her waist, head buried in her apron. Then he stepped away and joined the men. They mounted their horses. The boy swung up behind the older man, small hands gripping the warrior's belt. Then they rode. No raised voices, no blood, no judgment, just the sound of hooves slipping quietly into the night, and the prairie wind moving on behind them. Morning came like a sigh. Eli sat on the porch, hat low, coffee cooling in his cup. Clara stood inside, back against the doorframe, fingers curled tight around a bundle of cloth, the boy's blanket. She hadn't spoken since they left. Not really. Just stared into the places he used to sit, used to sleep, used to laugh softly when Eli hit his thumb again. Finally, she came outside. "He was never mine," she said, "but part of me needed someone to fix." Eli looked up at her. "And you think he needed fixing?" She shook her head. "No, but I did." He nodded. "That part, I understand." They sat together in silence for a long while. Then the sound came, faint at first, distant, unmistakable. Hoofbeats, but not many, just one. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon, headed fast toward the house. Eli stood, rifle nearby but untouched. A rider, not tribal, a deputy from town, horse lathered, face pale. He dismounted with a grunt and stepped forward. "Booker." "Ma'am." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" The deputy looked toward the empty road, dust still lingering where the riders had vanished. "Sheriff says the Apache came. Took the boy." Eli nodded. The deputy swallowed hard. "Sheriff also says he ain't gonna do anything about it." Clara's eyes flickered. "Why not?" The deputy scratched his chin, glancing awkwardly between them. "Says maybe the town's tired of chasing ghosts. Maybe we let this one ride." He mounted up again, tipped his hat. "Figured you'd want to know." Then he was gone. Eli watched him disappear down the road, dust swallowing him up. Clara turned toward the house, one hand resting on the doorframe. "You staying?" she asked quietly. Eli didn't answer right away, just looked up at the sky, wide, endless, and quiet again. "I got one more leak to fix," he said, and then he followed her inside. The days after were quiet, Not empty, not sad. Just settled. The kind of quiet that comes after a long winter storm when the wind has stopped yelling and the snow just sits, blanketing everything with a hush you don't dare break. Eli fixed the leak above the stove. Then he patched the floorboard in the hallway where the boy used to tiptoe. No one asked him to. No one said thank you. But the house seemed to breathe easier each time he did. Like the walls knew something had shifted. Clara cooked more often now. Not fancy meals, just warm ones. Sometimes she /d-hum while stirring the pot, soft and almost inaudible, as if remembering a tune she hadn't /t realized she /d forgotten. Eli didn't ask questions, and she didn't explain. It was the kind of understanding that didn't need words. One afternoon, Eli found the wooden box again, the one buried under the crawl space. This time he pulled it out. Inside were the carpenter's tools, old but well kept, sanded handles, worn steel, a chisel, 2 screwdrivers, and a handsaw with initials burned into the grip, JD, and something else, a folded piece of blue cloth, the uniform sash of a Union soldier, stained at the edge with something too faded to call red anymore. He didn't take it inside, just sat with it on the steps until Clara came out with a mug of tea. When she saw it, her hands trembled slightly. She sat beside him. "My father was from Tennessee," she said. "Fought for the South. But James, he wore blue." She traced the initials on the saw. "That was the first thing he ever made me. A box of scrap wood and iron nails. Called it a hope chest. I never filled it." Eli looked down. "Was he kind to you?" She smiled, soft and small. "Kinder than I deserved." The wind stirred, lifting the edge of the sash like a ghost trying to find its way home. Eli cleared his throat. "I wasn't much older than the boy when the war started. Lost a brother to it. Parents after that. Never buried em proper. Just rode out west and kept going." Clara didn't say anything. "I think," Eli added, "I've been hammering roofs ever since, trying to cover something that never had walls in the first place." She looked at him then, not pitiful, not warm, just true, like she saw something he hadn't shown anyone in a long, long time. "You've been fixing more than just the house," she said. He looked down, modest. "You too." They sat that way until the sun dipped below the hills, coloring the sky in a bleeding wash of amber and gold. Later that week, the boy came back. Not forever. Not even for a full night. Just one afternoon, just before the rains returned. Eli saw him first. A figure at the edge of the field, standing still as the trees. He stepped down from the porch, walked out slow. The boy didn't run, didn't smile, just waited. When Clara stepped out behind Eli, she froze. A sound caught in her throat, but she didn't call to him. Just waited like he did. The boy stepped forward. From beneath his tunic, he pulled out something wrapped in hide string. It was a feather, long, black, and sharp-pointed, tied to a small carving of a bird. Rough, but precise. He handed it to her. "He says it's a guardian," a voice said behind them. The young Apache rider from before had appeared without sound, horse grazing nearby. "They believe the spirit of the hawk watches over travelers, and those left behind." Clara held the carving like it was glass. "Tell him, thank you." The rider nodded and translated. The boy smiled, just a little. Then he looked at Eli and reached out his small hand. A handshake, unusual, deliberate. Eli knelt, took it. "Take care," he whispered. The boy nodded, turned, and left. They didn't watch him go. Not all the way. Some goodbyes are better left unfinished. Weeks passed, then months. People in Finch Hollow began nodding at Clara again. Not out of comfort, but respect. She still didn't visit the church, still didn't ask for favors. But the stares softened. Someone asked her to mend a coat. Someone else left flour by her porch with no note. The deputy stopped by once a week, sometimes just to say hello. The town didn't forget what happened, but they didn't chase it away either. One evening, Renshaw met Eli at the saloon. "You still livin' out there with the widow?" Eli sipped his drink. "She's not a widow anymore." Renshaw raised a brow. Eli shrugged. She's just Clara. The old man nodded slow. And you? Eli looked out the window at the night sky, where thunderclouds rolled like the backs of sleeping horses. I think I'm staying put. One spring morning, Clara walked into town alone. Not because she needed anything, just because it felt right. Children played near the well. A woman tipped her bonnet. A man held the door to the store. When she passed the blacksmith's, a painting caught her eye, nailed to the post. Crude brushstrokes on old canvas. A hawk, mid-flight, wings outstretched. Beneath it, he watches still. She smiled, not because it hurt, but because she finally knew what to do with the ache. When she returned home, Eli was fixing the fence. You ever think about adding a porch swing? She asked, eyes playful. Eli looked up, squinting at the sun. Only if you'll sit in it. She stepped beside him, boots crunching soft in the grass. I might. He handed her a nail. Then let's get started. Years later, the house still stood. The cottonwoods had grown taller, bending in the same wind that once carried storm warnings and war drums. The roof held strong, patched, sanded, and shingled by hands that had learned patience. No more leaks, just the creak of the porch swing, swaying gently in the golden light of evening. Clara sat on it now, wrapped in a shawl, eyes turned toward the horizon where the fields rippled like an ocean of gold. Her hair had streaks of silver, but her back was still straight, and her gaze was as steady as ever. The carved hawk still hung by the front door, feathers faded by years of weather but never once taken down. Eli came up the path with a bucket of water and a slow gait. His shoulders ached more than they used to, and his hands didn't grip tools the way they had in younger years. But there was peace in the ache, a kind earned, not cursed. He set the bucket down and gave her a quiet nod. Fence'll hold another season. She smiled. You say that every season, 'cause it's true every time. He sat beside her on the swing. The silence between them was like an old friend, familiar, worn in, and comfortable. A wagon creaked past on the road in the distance. A boy was driving, not a child anymore, not quite a man. Skin sun-darkened, hair long, eyes alert. An Apache rider followed behind him on horseback, eyes always scanning, always guarding. Clara watched the boy with a mix of pride and ache. He comes every year now, right on time. Eli nodded. He remembers. They sat in quiet reverence as the wagon disappeared down the path toward town. He'd be delivering herbs, Clara knew, medicines from the southern hills. Half the women in Finch Hollow used them now. Some didn't even remember where they came from. He's teaching the town, she whispered, without saying a word. Eli shifted in the swing, his hand resting lightly over hers. Same way you did. Clara looked over at him. I didn't teach anything. You loved something you weren't supposed to, Eli said. That teaches more than preaching ever will. She didn't answer, just let her fingers intertwine with his. The town had changed too. Sheriff Thompson had passed, buried on the hill with a small cross and fewer regrets than most. The saloon had been rebuilt, not fancier, just stronger. The schoolhouse was larger, and now taught 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Apache. People didn't forget, but they learned. And when someone new would ask about the woman at the edge of town with the swing and the hawk carving, they'd hear a dozen different stories. Some said she saved an enemy child. Some said she buried her husband with her own hands and never looked back. Others said she taught a whole town how to soften without breaking. None of them were wrong. That summer, Clara fell ill. Came slow. Not a sudden pain, just a gradual dimming. She still watched the horizon, still served tea on the porch. But her steps slowed, and her voice quieted. One evening, she placed something in Eli's hands. The carved hawk. He doesn't need it anymore, she said. But maybe we do. He placed it back on the nail by the door. She passed 2 weeks later, just after the sun rose over the fields. Eli buried her under the cottonwoods, near the spot where the boy once stood with the riders, where the wind whispered through the trees like it remembered everything. He didn't speak at the grave, didn't need to. In the years that followed, The house became a resting stop. Travelers paused there not for food or shelter, but for the story. Some carved small hawks of their own. Others just sat on the swing and felt the wind press against their backs like an old promise not quite broken. The boy returned more often, then with a family of his own. One daughter, one son, both taught the same way Clara once taught without trying. With warmth, with strength, with silence when silence mattered most. Eli grew older. His hands curled. His legs ached. But he stayed. Every morning he would step out, touch the hawk carving by the door, and sit on the swing. One summer, just after a thunderstorm, he didn't come out. They found him still in bed, hands folded, face peaceful. A letter sat on the table beside him. For words, the roof never leaked. Years later, children at the schoolhouse would write essays about the house at the edge of town. Some would say it was haunted not by ghosts but by memories. Some would say it was sacred not because of who lived there, but because of what survived there. But all of them would end the same way, with the image of a hawk, wings stretched wide across the western sky. Watching, always watching,